Hello Year 5 and 6, it's really nice to be seeing you, virtually I suppose. We are missing you, lots and lots, and we hope that you are enjoying all the home learning that we have been setting. For our story times that we're going to be sharing with you at the end of each day, we thought as a team we'd start by sharing some of the stories from the Survivors book, a book that we have been using in the past. The first story is about a girl called Julianne Köpke, and the story is called The Girl Who Fell from the Sky. On Christmas Eve, 17-year-old Julianne Köpke was flying high above the South American rainforest when the airliner carrying her and her mother was hit by a violent storm. The previous evening had been prom night at Köpke's school, but now term was over and they were heading home for the holidays. Home meant the remote Amazonian town of Pucallpa in Peru, where Köpke's father, Hans Willem, worked as a biologist. Her mother, Maria, was an ornithologist who studied birds and their behaviour. Sharing her parents' passion for science and nature, Köpke planned to follow their example by studying biology at university. On board the four-engined Lockheed Electra aeroplane, she could hear other passengers complaining because their flight had been delayed by nearly 7 hours. But they were airborne now, and Köpke was happy to be on holiday and looking forward to seeing her father. From her window seat she noticed storm clouds in the distance, but she loved flying and had no reason to feel afraid. Her mother felt less relaxed about the storm. Never quite believing that something metal could rival the birds she studied, Maria didn't like flying at the best of times. Now she began to feel anxious as the Electra dipped suddenly and entered a massive rain-dark cloud. Before long, the plane was being buffeted about by the air currents, and after a few minutes even Köpke began to feel that something wasn't quite right. Bags and other pieces of luggage started to fall from the overhead racks, and drinks tipped into passengers' laps. Soon Christmas presents and parcels began bouncing around the cabin as the aircraft was pitched up and down by the turbulence. Through her window, Köpke could see flashes of lightning around the aircraft. With the storm obviously closing in, she too began to feel scared. Above the sound of the propellers, several passengers could be heard crying as she reached across for her mother's hand. The violent pitching continued like this for nearly 10 minutes, throwing the aircraft this way and that. Gripping her mother's hand more tightly now, Köpke looked out of the window and saw that one of the engines was glowing brightly. Her mother also noticed this and very quickly said, "That is the end. It is all over." These were the last words Köpke ever heard her say. Moments later, the cabin was plunged into darkness, and the Electra went into a steep nosedive. Köpke couldn't see anything in the pitch black, and could hear nothing but the roar of the engines. Then, just as suddenly, everything went silent. With a shock, Tina realised she was somehow outside the aeroplane, still trapped in her seat but tumbling over and over and over. With nothing around her but the rush of cold air, she was plummeting down towards the jungle. Coming out of the clouds, she momentarily glimpsed the tops of the trees spinning up to meet her like a patch of giant broccoli. It was petrifying, but she must have passed out immediately, because the next thing she remembered was waking up the following morning. It was Christmas Day. She was still trapped into her seat, but now it was wedged firmly into the ground. 40 minutes after taking off, the aircraft had apparently been struck by lightning, one deadly bolt causing a fuel tank to explode and rip off the right wing. As the fuselage began to disintegrate around her, Köpke had been thrown clear of the airborne wreckage and then fell more than 2 miles down into the jungle below. Despite the trauma of this experience, she realised at once what had happened. Looking up at the trees, she knew she had survived an air disaster, probably because her seat had broken the fall as she crashed through the dense foliage. Unsurprisingly, the 17-year-old was in considerable pain and feeling dizzy. She had broken her collarbone, damaged a ligament in one knee, and sustained deep cuts and bruises as she hit the ground. Her left eye was also swollen shut, but she could still walk and knew she had to start finding a way to safety. Köpke had learned enough about the jungle from her parents to know it wasn't as dangerous as people like to think. Travelling on foot It was important to keep a cool head and not to do anything foolish, but she had no idea where she was, or where any of the other passengers had come down. She had also lost a shoe and her glasses, which complicated things as she was very short-sighted. Nor was she dressed for a jungle trek, with only a light cotton summer dress to protect her from the hordes of biting, stinging insects that were buzzing all around her. The first thing to establish was if anyone else was nearby, especially her mother. But when Köpke called out, there was no response except the chatter of startled animals. Sometime later, she was thrilled to hear an aircraft circling overhead. Presumably the crew were looking for survivors, but since she couldn't see the plane through the thick canopy of trees, she quickly guessed they couldn't see her either. This realization made her feel utterly alone. For a while, the Köpkes had lived in a remote scientific research station, and Hans Willem had taught his daughter some useful survival tips. For example, he told her that walking through shallow water can be safer than walking on land. Snakes and other venomous creatures are hard to spot on the ground and may attack if anyone steps too near them. Köpke also knew that jungle settlements tend to be built along rivers, so if she stayed near water, she would stand a better chance of meeting someone and finding help. Well, I'm going